The air in the Starlight Diner always smelled the same. It was a thick, greasy perfume of sizzling bacon, stale coffee, and the sweet, sticky scent of maple syrup that seemed to cling to every surface. For Clara, it was the smell of her life, a constant reminder of the long hours that stretched out before her, day after day. She moved between the tables, a heavy white oval tray balanced effortlessly on one hand. Her feet, stuffed into worn-out sneakers, ached with a familiar, dull throb. It was a rhythm she knew by heart, the clatter of plates, the hiss of the grill from the kitchen, the low hum of conversations that blurred into a single, meaningless noise. Her smile was a mask she had perfected over the years. It was a polite, practiced curve of her lips that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "More coffee, folks?" she'd ask, her voice bright and cheerful, a complete contrast to the heavy feeling in her chest. She'd pour the dark liquid into chipped mugs, her movements automatic, her mind a million miles away. Or maybe it was $1,000,000 away, which is what her student loan balance felt like. It was a number so big it felt abstract, like a monster hiding under her bed. Except this monster sent her letters every month. Its red ink screaming for money she didn't have, she slid a plate of pancakes and eggs onto a table for a trucker who barely looked up from his phone. He just grunted in response. She was used to it. And here she wasn't Clara, she was Waitress or Hey You, or the sound of snapping fingers when someone wanted a refill. She felt invisible, like a ghost floating through the lives of other people, just there to clear their plates and fill their cups. The real Clara, the one who used to spend hours in front of a canvas, her hands smudged with cerulean blue and cadmium yellow, felt like a person from another lifetime. That Clara was a stranger now. Her apartment, a small boxy room on the third floor of a brick building, held the evidence of that other life. In the corner, behind a stack of unpaid bills, stood an old wooden easel. A dusty canvas was still stretched across it, a half-finished painting of a sun-drenched field of wildflowers. She remembered starting it. She remembered the feeling of the brush in her hand, the way the colors mixed and swirled together to create something beautiful out of nothing. That was before the money got tighter, before the fights with him started, before he told her that playing with paints wasn't a real career and she needed to grow up. The words had stung more than she let on, planting a seed of doubt that grew into a thorny weed, choking out her passion. Now the paints were dried up in their tubes and the brushes were stiff with old color. Every time she looked at that corner, a wave of sadness washed over her, so heavy it made it hard to breathe. A young couple sat in the booth by the window, laughing as they shared a milkshake with 2 straws. Clara watched them for a second, a sharp pang of jealousy hitting her. She remembered being like that, full of easy laughter and simple dreams. She and her ex used to come to places like this, dreaming about the future they would build together. He was going to be a musician, she was going to be an artist. They were going to be poor but happy. But poor turned out to be a lot less romantic than they'd imagined, and happy had crumbled under the weight of it. The breakup hadn't been a big, dramatic explosion. It had been a slow, quiet fizzle, like a fire running out of fuel, leaving nothing but cold ash. Now he was playing in a band that was actually getting some gigs. And she was here, serving people who didn't even see her. The morning rush began to die down, the steady stream of customers thinning to a trickle. The diner grew quieter, the noise level dropping to a low murmur. Clara started her side work, wiping down the empty tables, her movements slow and heavy. She sprayed a clean cloth with disinfectant and began to scrub at a sticky ring left by a coffee mug. The circular motion was mindless, almost meditative. She thought about the second job she had to get to in a few hours, stocking shelves at a grocery store. It was another uniform, another set of aching muscles, another few dollars to throw at the mountain of debt. There was no time for anything else, no energy for anything else. Her dreams felt like silly, childish things she had packed away in a box and forgotten in the attic. She sighed, pushing a stray strand of hair out of her face. Her hand had a small, faint smudge of blue on it, a remnant from when she had moved the easel last week to clean behind it. She hadn't been able to bring herself to throw it away. She stared at the smudge for a moment. It was like a tiny, faded tattoo, a ghost of the person she used to be. A wave of hopelessness washed over her, so strong it made her feel dizzy. Was this it? Was this all her life was going to be? Wiping up spills and working herself to the bone just to pay the bills, with nothing to look forward to. No joy, no color, no passion. The thought was so terrifying it made her want to sit down and cry right there on the greasy diner floor. But she didn't. She just took a deep breath, straightened her back, and kept wiping. The endless grind didn't stop for tears. It just kept going, and she had to keep going with it. The little bell above the diner door jingled, a sound so familiar to Clara that it was like the beating of her own heart. She didn't even look up at first, just grabbed a fresh pot of coffee from the burner. Another customer, another order, another few dollars in the tip jar. It was all part of the endless loop. But when she finally turned around, she saw him. He had chosen the corner booth, the one with the ripped vinyl seat that most people avoided. He slid into it with a quiet grace, moving like he didn't want to disturb the air around him. He wore a simple, dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled down low, casting a shadow over his face. He wasn't like the usual lunch crowd. There was no hurry in his movements, no phone in his hand, no impatient tap of his fingers on the table. He just sat there, looking out the window at the passing cars. A still island in the middle of the diner's noisy ocean. Clara watched him for a second from behind the counter. Her curiosity piqued despite her exhaustion. He seemed to be taking it all in, the way the short-door cook flipped burgers with a practiced flick of his wrist, the tired laugh of a mother trying to calm her fussy child, the way the fluorescent lights hummed and flickered overhead. He wasn't just waiting to be served. He was observing the scene like it was a play. After a minute, Clara grabbed her order pad and walked over, her feet feeling heavier than ever. She pasted on her standard customer service smile. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice a little too bright, a little too cheerful. He looked up, and for the first time she saw his eyes. They were kind, with a deep, thoughtful look in them that seemed to see right through her tired smile. "Just a coffee, please," he said, his voice soft and a little rough. "And a slice of that pie, if it's any good." He gestured with his chin towards the glass case where the cherry and apple pies sat under a dim light. "It's the best in the city," Clara replied, the line rolling off her tongue automatically. It wasn't true, probably, but it was what she was supposed to say. "Which kind?" "Cherry, please." "Thank you." The way he said "thank you" was different, too. It wasn't a mumbled afterthought. It was genuine, like she had just done him a great favor by taking his order. She nodded and turned away, feeling a strange little flutter in her chest. She brushed it off. She was just tired. Tired people felt weird things. She poured the coffee and sliced the pie, her movements efficient and quick. When she placed the mug and plate in front of him, the steam from the coffee rising to meet her face, he gave her another one of those sincere, warm smiles. "Looks great," he said. She just nodded and went back to her work, wiping down the counter, refilling salt shakers, her mind a blank slate of routine tasks. But every so often her eyes would drift over to the corner booth. He didn't touch his phone. He didn't read a paper. He just ate his pie slowly, savoring each bite, and drank his coffee, his gaze wandering around the room. He was a quiet presence, a calming force in the chaotic energy of the diner. It was strange. Most people were in their own world, lost in their own problems. But he seemed to be completely present in the moment, a part of the diner's world without being consumed by it. An hour or so later, the lunch rush had faded and the diner was quiet again. Clara was clearing a table nearby, stacking the dirty plates onto her tray. The man in the corner had finished his pie and was just nursing the last of his coffee. He caught her eye as she worked. She expected him to ask for the check like everyone else did. Instead, he asked a question that stopped her in her tracks. "How's your day going?" he asked. It wasn't the casual, "How are you?" that people throw out without expecting a real answer. His tone was gentle, his eyes focused on her with a look of genuine curiosity. Clara froze, a dirty fork in her hand. The automatic "fine, thanks, and you?" was right there on the tip of her tongue. It was her shield, The easy answer that kept people at a distance? But looking at him, at the kindness in his eyes, she felt the shield crack. She was just so tired of pretending. She was so tired of being fine. She let out a small, weary sigh. "It's long," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's been a long day." She couldn't remember the last time she had been that honest with a customer. With anyone, really. He just nodded, his expression full of understanding. He didn't offer her a fake smile or a platitude like "hang in there." He just listened. "Yeah," he said softly. "I get that. Some days are like that." His simple validation was more comforting than any cheerful advice could have been. It felt like a small weight had been lifted off her shoulders just by being heard. She gave him a small, real smile, one that actually reached her eyes this time. She went back to clearing the table, feeling a little lighter, a little more seen. As she reached for a ketchup bottle, her hand brushed against the light from the window. That's when he saw it. The small, faded smudge of blue paint on her knuckle, a ghost from her other life. His eyes followed her hand as she put the bottles back on the table. Then he glanced at her bag, which was slung over the back of an empty chair nearby. The corner of her old sketchbook was sticking out of it. He put the pieces together in his mind. He looked back at her, his gaze even softer than before. "You're an artist?" he asked gently. The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Artist. It was a word she hadn't heard in so long, a word she had stopped using to describe herself. It felt like a name from a past life, a life that belonged to someone else. She looked down at her hand, at the little blue smudge that she had tried so many times to scrub off but never could. It was a permanent reminder of who she used to be. A wave of sadness and regret washed over her, so powerful it almost took her breath away. She thought of the dusty easel in her apartment, the dried-up tubes of paint, the half-finished canvas that mocked her every time she walked past it. She shook her head slowly, a sad, bitter smile touching her lips. "I used to be," she said, the words heavy with the weight of her lost dreams. "I used to be." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and sad. "I used to be." It was a confession, a quiet admission of defeat. Clara immediately regretted saying it. It was too much, too personal to share with a stranger in a greasy spoon diner. She braced herself for the usual responses, a pitying look, a hollow platitude like, "You should pick it up again." Or, even worse, a complete change of subject as the person realized they had stumbled into something uncomfortable. She started to turn away, to retreat back into the safe, invisible shell of her uniform. But he didn't do any of those things. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable but not unkind. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, and for a moment, the noisy diner seemed to fade into the background. It was just the two of them in that little corner booth. "Used to be is a heavy thing to carry," he said, his voice low and gentle. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, like he knew the exact weight of it himself. Clara stopped, her hand still holding the dirty fork. She looked at him, really looked at him. The shadow from his cap couldn't hide the empathy in his eyes. He wasn't just being polite. He understood. She felt a lump form in her throat, a surprising and unwelcome surge of emotion. She just nodded, unable to trust her own voice. "People think creating is about the final product," he continued, his gaze thoughtful. "The painting on the wall, the song on the radio, the book on the shelf. But that's not what it's really about. It's about the act itself. It's about seeing the world in a way that no one else does, and having the courage to show people what you see." He paused, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "The world can be a pretty dark place, you know? It's full of noise and anger and people rushing around, not really looking at anything. People who create, they don't just make pretty things. They're lighting candles. And even one small candle can push back a whole lot of dark." His words seeped into Clara, past all the layers of tiredness and cynicism she had built up over the years. It was a completely different way of thinking about it. Her ex had always talked about art in terms of success, of gallery shows and sales. When that didn't happen right away, he had called it a failure, a hobby she needed to outgrow. But this man wasn't talking about success. He was talking about light. "It's easy to let the candle go out," he said, as if reading her mind. "It's easy to think, what's the point? My little light doesn't matter in a world this big, but it does. It matters to someone. Maybe it only matters to you at first, but that's enough. Because when you create something, you're connecting to a part of yourself that's real. You're reminding yourself that there's more to life than just this." He gestured vaguely around the diner. At the sticky tables and the tired faces, Clara found herself leaning in, captivated. She had forgotten what it felt like to talk about art, to even think about it in this way. She had been so focused on the mountain of debt and the disappointment in her ex's eyes that she had completely forgotten why she ever picked up a brush in the first place. She remembered the feeling of mixing colors, the thrill of capturing a specific shade of sunlight on a leaf, the peace she felt when the rest of the world melted away and it was just her and the canvas. It was a feeling of being alive, of being truly herself. "I tell stories," he said, his voice dropping even lower, like he was sharing a secret. "And sometimes you forget why you started. You get caught up in the business of it all, the expectations, the critics, the noise. You start creating for other people, not for yourself. And the light gets dimmer. You have to find your way back to the reason you lit the candle in the first place. You have to do it for you." He looked directly into her eyes then, and she felt a jolt, like a spark had jumped from him to her. "Don't let anyone else blow out your candle," he said softly. "Not even you." The spell was broken by the sharp ding of the kitchen bell. An order was up. Clara jumped, pulled abruptly back into the reality of her job. The moment felt fragile, like a soap bubble, and she was afraid it would pop. She looked from the man's kind face to the kitchen window and back again. I should get that," she stammered, her voice thick. He nodded, a small, understanding smile on his lips. "Of course. You have work to do." He picked up his mug and drained the last of his coffee. Then he slid out of the booth, his movements as quiet and graceful as when he had arrived. He walked to the counter, and Clara busied herself with grabbing the hot plates from the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't watch him pay. She didn't want to see the pitying tip he might leave, the charity for the sad, failed artist. She just wanted the moment to be over so she could go back to being invisible. She heard the door jingle, the sound signaling his departure. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. It was over. A strange, wonderful, and slightly painful encounter was now just a memory. She delivered the food to her table, her mind a million miles away. The words he had said echoed in her head. Asterisk lighting a candle. "Don't let anyone blow it out?" Asterisk, it felt like a dream. Had that really just happened? Or had her exhausted mind finally conjured up a kind, wise stranger to tell her everything she needed to hear? The diner was the same as it always was. The grease still hung in the air, the fluorescent lights still hummed, the customers were still lost in their own worlds. But something felt different. The air in the corner booth he had occupied seemed warmer somehow. The space felt peaceful. She finished her shift in a daze, going through the motions automatically, wiping tables, refilling coffee, sweeping the floor. But a part of her was still in that booth, listening to a soft voice talk about candles in dark places. The interaction had been so brief, maybe 15 minutes in total, but it had shaken something loose inside her. It was like a small, bright window had been opened in a dark, stuffy room, letting in a sliver of light and a breath of fresh air. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was smaller and more fragile than that. It was a question. A tiny, quiet whisper in the back of her mind that asked. The last few hours of her shift passed in a strange, blurry haze. The diner's usual chaos seemed to fade into a dull hum in the background of her mind. She went through the motions, her body working on autopilot while her thoughts replayed the short conversation in the corner booth over and over again. Asterisk lighting a candle. "Don't let anyone blow it out," asterisk, the words echoed in her head. Not like a shout, but like a soft, persistent melody she couldn't get out of her mind. She refilled coffee for a businessman who was typing furiously on his laptop, cleared plates from a family with loud, messy children, and took an order for a club sandwich from an old man who read the newspaper with a magnifying glass. They were all just shapes and sounds, fleeting blurs on the edges of the vivid memory that was playing on a loop in her mind as the evening wore on. The stream of customers slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. The cook, a gruff man named Frank with a stained apron and a permanent scowl, wiped down his grill and yelled a gruff, "See ya tomorrow," over his shoulder before disappearing out the back door. And then she was alone. The silence that fell over the Starlight Diner was a completely different creature from the noisy bustle of the day. It was heavy and thick, filled with the ghosts of conversations and the lingering smell of fried food. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to buzz louder in the quiet, casting long, lonely shadows across the empty tables. Clara began her closing duties, her movements slow and deliberate. She swept the floor, the bristles of the broom scratching against the worn linoleum, the sound echoing in the vast emptiness. She wiped down the counter, her cloth moving in slow circles, cleaning away the day's mess. She was procrastinating, and she knew it. She was saving one last task for the end. The corner booth. It felt different now. It was no longer just a ripped vinyl seat in a greasy diner. It was the place where the kind man had sat. It was the place where someone had seen her, truly seen her, and had spoken to the part of her she thought was dead. She cleaned all the other tables first, stacking chairs on top of them, her mind still racing. Was she making too much of it? Maybe he was just a nice guy who said nice things to everyone. Maybe he felt sorry for her, the sad waitress with the paint on her hand. A wave of self-doubt washed over her, cold and sharp. She was probably just a momentary distraction for him, a story he would forget by tomorrow. The thought stung, and she angrily shoved it away. Whether he remembered it or not, she did. And for those few minutes, she had felt less invisible than she had in years. Finally, there was nothing left to do but clean his booth. She took a deep breath and walked over, her heart thumping a little faster than usual. She could almost see him sitting there, his kind eyes watching her, his soft voice speaking about candles and dark places. She started by wiping down the table, her hand tracing the path where his coffee mug had been. Then, she picked up the credit card receipt he had left on the table. Her plan was just to add it to the small pile of tips she had collected throughout the day. It was just another piece of paper, but her eyes caught the numbers on the tip line first. And she stopped breathing. It wasn't $10. It wasn't $20. It was $500. Her mind refused to process it. It had to be a mistake. A typo. Maybe he meant to write 50 and had accidentally added an extra zero. Her hands started to shake as she stared at the 3 digits followed by 2 more zeros. $500. That was more than she made in an entire week, sometimes 2. That was a car payment, a month's worth of groceries, a new set of paints and canvases. The thought came to her unbidden, and it felt like a lightning strike. She looked at the total, then at the merchant copy, then back at the customer copy he had left. The numbers were the same. It was real. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and sudden. It wasn't just the money. The money was shocking, life-altering, but it wasn't the whole story. The money was a practical, incredible gift, but it was the message written below the tip line that truly shattered her world. Her eyes, blurred with tears, focused on the neat, deliberate handwriting, asterisk, "Thank you for sharing a piece of your story with me. The world is a better place with your art in it. Please don't ever let that light go out again. Your canvas is waiting. Keanu, asterisk," she read it once. Then again, and a third time, her lips moving silently with the words. Each reading sent a new wave of emotion crashing over her. Thank you for sharing a piece of your story. He had listened. He had actually listened. The world is a better place with your art in it. Not, your art could be good, or you should try again. It was a statement of fact. As if her art, the art she wasn't even creating anymore, was already making a difference. Don't ever let that light go out again. He was repeating his own metaphor, a call to action just for her. Your canvas is waiting, and then there was the name, Keanu. Suddenly it all clicked into place. The quiet demeanor, the baseball cap, the familiar but unplaceable face, the deep, kind eyes. It was him, the actor. The one from the movies. The one everyone said was one of the nicest guys in Hollywood. A sob escaped her lips, a loud, ragged sound that was swallowed by the diner's empty silence. It wasn't just a kind stranger. It was him. A person who had everything, who was known and admired by millions, had taken the time to sit in a dingy diner and see her. He had seen her pain, her lost dream, and had not only offered kindness but had given her a message so personal, so profound. It felt like it had been written just for her by the universe itself. The dam broke. The years of exhaustion. The loneliness, the crushing weight of her debt, the heartbreak of her failed relationship, the grief for the artist she used to be, it all came rushing out at once. She sank into the booth, the same one he had sat in, and clutched the little piece of paper to her chest like a holy relic. Her body shook with violent, uncontrollable sobs. She cried for the girl who used to paint in sun-drenched fields. She cried for the woman who felt invisible and forgotten. She cried from the sheer, overwhelming shock of being so deeply, profoundly seen. These were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of catharsis, of a pain so long held that its release was both agonizing and exhilarating. It was the sound of a wall crumbling, a wall she had built around herself brick by brick to keep from getting hurt. The money was a miracle, a lifeline thrown to her in a turbulent sea. But the words were a lighthouse, guiding her back to a shore she thought she had lost forever. She sat there in the quiet, empty diner, a solitary figure bathed in the harsh fluorescent light, weeping with a force that felt like it might shake her apart, holding a note that had just put her broken world back together. The sobs slowly subsided, leaving her feeling empty and hollowed out, but in a good way, like a vessel that had been scrubbed clean. She sat in the quiet booth for a long time, the crumpled receipt clutched in her hand. The tears had stopped, but she could still feel their salty tracks on her cheeks. The silence of the diner was no longer lonely. It was peaceful, sacred. It was the space where her life had shifted on its axis. She slowly uncurled her fingers and smoothed out the little piece of paper. The handwriting was still there, the words still glowing with an impossible warmth. "Your canvas is waiting," she read it one more time, and this time a different kind of tear welled up, one of pure, unadulterated gratitude. With a deep, shaky breath, she pushed herself up from the booth. Her legs felt wobbly, like a newborn foal's. She moved slowly as if in a trance, collecting the rest of the receipts and cashing out her register. Her hands, which had been shaking so violently just moments before, were now surprisingly steady as she counted the money. The $500 felt like a brick, solid and real and heavy with possibility. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her wallet, separating it from the small wad of ones and fives she had earned in tips. It was in a different category altogether. It wasn't just money. It was a message. The final tasks of closing up the diner felt different too. Flipping the sign on the door to closed, wiping down the last of the counters, turning off the buzzing fluorescent lights one by one until the only illumination came from the soft glow of the exit sign. Each action was deliberate, a final farewell to the old Clara, the one who had been sleepwalking through her life. When she locked the door behind her and stepped out into the cool night air, it felt like she was stepping into a new world. The walk home was a journey. Through a city she felt like she was seeing for the first time. The streetlights didn't just cast harsh shadows. They created pools of soft, golden light on the pavement. The distant wail of a siren wasn't just an annoyance. It was the sound of a living, breathing city full of stories. She looked up at the sliver of moon hanging in the dark sky and felt a connection to it, a sense of being a small part of something vast and beautiful. She had spent so long looking down at her feet, at the cracked pavement and the grimy floors of the diner, that she had forgotten to look up when she finally unlocked the door to her small apartment. The familiar feeling of dread didn't wash over her. The room was dark and quiet, just as she had left it, but it didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a room that was waiting. She didn't turn on the main overhead light. Instead, she just stood in the darkness for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. She walked over to the kitchen counter and carefully placed the note next to the crumpled receipt. It was her anchor, her proof that the afternoon hadn't been a dream. Then she turned and faced the corner. The easel stood there, a dark silhouette against the faint light from the window. The half-finished painting of the wildflowers was a ghost from another life. For the first time, it didn't make her feel sad or ashamed. It just was. It was something she had started, and now she knew she could finish it or she could start something new. The choice was hers, a familiar voice of doubt, a voice that sounded a lot like her ex's, whispered in the back of her mind. Asterisk, this is ridiculous. It was just one guy. One lucky day. Tomorrow you'll be right back where you started, slinging coffee and counting pennies. Don't be a fool, asterisk, the voice was strong, and for a moment it almost won. She felt the old, heavy cloak of hopelessness start to settle back onto her shoulders, but then she walked back to the counter and picked up the note. She ran her fingers over the indentations the pen had made on the paper. The world is a better place with your art in it. She looked at the receipt, at the impossible, wonderful number. This wasn't just a kind word. This was an investment. Someone, a person who had no reason to care, had invested in her. He had seen the tiny, flickering candle inside her and had decided to help her guard the flame. The doubt was still there, a quiet hum in the background, but it no longer had the power to silence her. She walked over to the corner and switched on a small lamp she kept by her art supplies. The soft light illuminated the dusty easel, the stiff brushes, the dried-up tubes of paint. It was a mess. It was the physical representation of her neglected dream. She knew she couldn't just start painting. She had to prepare the space. She had to show the universe and herself that she was serious. She spent the next hour cleaning. She wiped down the easel, removing a thick layer of gray dust. She gathered all her brushes and put them in a jar of turpentine, watching as the hard, crusted paint began to soften and dissolve. It felt like she was cleaning away the years of neglect. She sorted through her tubes of paint, squeezing out the ones that were completely dried and hopeless, but finding a few that still had life left in them. Cerulean blue, cadmium yellow, titanium white, the colors of her old life waiting to be brought back to life. She found a new, blank canvas and leaned it against the wall, facing her. It was white and empty and full of promise. It was waiting. Finally, everything was ready. The space was clean. The tools were prepared. The canvas was waiting. She stood in front of it, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. It had been so long. What if she had forgotten how? What if the magic was gone? She picked up a brush, its bristles now soft and clean. She squeezed a small dollop of the bright cerulean blue onto her palette, the same color as the faded smudge on her hand. The smell of the oil paint filled the air, a scent she hadn't realized she missed so much. It was the smell of creation. Her hand hovered over the canvas, trembling slightly. She closed her eyes and saw his kind face, heard his gentle voice. Don't ever let that light go out again. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes. She didn't have a grand plan. She didn't know what she was going to paint. She just knew she had to start. She touched the brush to the canvas. The feeling was electric. It was a jolt of pure, unadulterated rightness. The blue paint spread across the white surface, a river of color flowing from her soul. It wasn't a perfect stroke. It was just a stroke. But it was hers. The world outside her apartment, the bills, the second job, the heartbreak, it all faded away. There was only the brush in her hand, the canvas in front of her, and the light inside her, burning brighter than it had in years. She painted for a long time, not thinking, just feeling. She painted the color blue, the color of sadness and hope. She painted the yellow of a distant memory of sunshine. She painted the white of a new beginning. When she finally stepped back, her arm aching and her clothes smudged with paint, she looked at what she had created. It wasn't a masterpiece. It was just a mess of color and emotion. But it was alive. And so was she,